Hello, I'm Jan Witkowski from Cold Spring Harbour, and this is the 88th Cold Spring Harbour Laboratory Symposium on Quantitative Biology. I have to think about saying that. The topic this year is brain-body physiology, and I'm very delighted to have Holly Ingraham from University of California, San Francisco with me. Holly, you're talking, have you already talked or are you talking tomorrow?
I talk tomorrow.
Okay, so I can confess some ignorance of what
Yes,
you're going to talk
absolutely.
about. So why don't we start by you telling me a little bit about the topics?
What I'm going to talk about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've been probably for about 20 years, well, I should go back. I am very well trained in biochemistry and the actions of hormones and the molecular actions of hormones in different aspects of our physiology. And about 15 years ago, maybe 20, I decided to, as I say, leave that field and really do something that I'm quite motivated to do, which is to think about how hormones are really affecting female physiology at a mechanistic level. So we understand a lot about what hormones, you know, we have the general picture, and we know we know generally what hormones do and how they're affecting us, or the phenotypes or the physiology, but we don't really know how. We don't know the basic molecular mechanisms. And since I'm trained in mechanistic biology, molecular biology, I decided to delve into that. And in particular, I wanted to understand what estrogen, which is really the way I see, it's really the lens in which I look at female physiology, because it's the major hormone that's going to drive all of this sort of what I say sculpting our physiology. And so we started looking at what estrogen was specifically doing in circuits that were important for driving sexual behavior and other things. And so that's sort of how I got into it. And then more recently, I've been working in what estrogen is doing in the gut. And part of this is motivated by the different aspects of what women are going to go through when estrogen goes offline. So there's all of these adaptive responses that occur for women beginning with perimenopausal and postmenopausal. Things like your visceral fat increases, your bone density goes down, you have brain fog, and all of these things we know about, but we really don't know how that occurs. We don't know what neurons in the brain are being affected by the sudden drop in loss in estrogen. And likewise in the gut, we know that young women suffer from irritable bowel syndrome far more than men. And it's very, these are chronic insidious diseases that I'm talking about. And yet we have no clue where estrogen is acting in the gut and what it's doing.
I mean, when you say that you're interested in estrogen and the gut, it's not a connection I would have made, but is that because I don't experience these things?
Well,
I
will just say there is a TikTok channel, which I don't go into TikTok, but I think there's 6 million viewers or followers and it's called Hot Girls with IBS. So there you go, 6 million young girls are on this channel. Amazing. Looking at what they can do to mitigate their chronic conditions. And what we're talking about both with the gut and in terms of menopause and the things that happen in our brains when we have these fluctuating hormones, we're really talking about the quality, our quality of life degrading. And we're 51% of the population, and we should know some of these answers by now. Really, it's 2024?
Yes. Well, let's come back. So returning to the endocrine
Yes.
side of things, Do
you want to know what I'm going to talk about?
Yes. Well, let's return to
Okay.
the more general things in a moment.
Okay.
Yes. So tomorrow.
So this project is probably one of the most exciting projects in my career. As a scientist, I think I get excited about every decade. Something comes in every decade that you go, wow. So just recently we had one of those wow moments. So briefly, we were fooling around with estrogen in the brain, and we were using a control area, and the deal is that we were getting rid of estrogen signaling, okay? Mm-hmm. We were trying to figure out what it does, so you get rid of it. That's a classic gain of function, loss of function approach. And what we found is an incredible, extraordinary bone phenotype. So when you get rid of estrogen in one set of neurons in the hypothalamus, you get this incredibly strong bone phenotype, only in females. So as a scientist, you have to say to yourself, do I know anything about bone? No. Should I work on bone? I don't know. How am I going to get funded to do this? But then I thought, this is such an amazing phenotype. It's female specific. How cool is that? And bone loss for women is a huge issue. Really a huge issue.
Generally.
It's a huge issue for postmenopausal women, but it's also, if you think about it, think about all those breast cancer survivors that go on these anti-hormone therapies, anti-estrogen therapies. They are just put into premature menopause, and their bone loss is severe.
The epidemiology of that's been well recognized.
Oh yeah, and they know that, there's a whole nother discussion about the public policy about hormone replacement therapy, which is, probably still controversial. But we do know that with the drop in hormone replacement therapy, hip fractures have really gone up. So we know there's this connection between estrogen and bone, because estrogen is an anabolic hormone for bone. So we found this bone phenotype, and then we had to figure out what was going on, and we figured out there was this circulatory factor, that a new hormone that gets released from these neurons to create this really huge a bone building hormone. And so we had to figure out what that was, and that took about 3 or 4 years. And all the ways we thought we were going to do it, none of them worked, which is what goes on in science. And then we just got lucky and got a break and went with it.
So what was that break?
Well, we put these mutant mice on a high-fat diet, and every single one of the reviewers of this paper that's about ready to be published asked us why we did that. And sometimes you just do an experiment, but we did come up with a good way. We said maybe the high-fat diet the dietary challenge would affect these neurons in the brain and change the function. So we lost the bone phenotype, and then we could go in and use genomic tools to figure out what are the candidates. We narrowed it down, and then we found this hormone that we didn't expect to be a hormone, because we were, this is where scientists get ruts in their brain, and they think something has to look like it has to look, quack like a duck, everything else. I don't know the saying. But so we were a little bit surprised. And then probably the best piece of data that has come in my career came in when the senior postdoctoral fellow in my lab, Bill Krause, found that this is a hormone that gets made in the females only in lactation. So, and then we said, oh, this is really cool. This must be the reason that in lactating mothers, because you're losing calcium, you're stripping off calcium from your bones for milk, and basically you need a way to replenish that. You don't have any estrogen. Estrogen's not on board, so it can't help. It's not there. That's why you don't get pregnant when you're lactating. And so the brain takes over. and delivers this hormone. And so this is an example where people in the bone field never would be thinking about the brain. People in the brain area, the neuroscience, never ever think about bone. So this is an example where this inter-organ communication and really what this symposium is all about, brain-body physiology, is important.
So in this case, the brain, you just described the brain-bone direction. What about the bone to the brain? How does the brain or that nucleus know
yes,
to
That's a
to
wonderful question. We don't know. If you talk to an endocrinologist, they'll say, oh, some hormone has to be coming from the bone. But of course, it could be coming from the mammary gland. It could be coming from the parathyroid gland. It doesn't, that's where physiology is complicated. And that's why people, they've shied away from looking at these multi-organ systems because it's hard. There's a lot of variables.
So you now have you found presume it's a small peptide of...
It's a small protein.
Yeah.
But importantly, when we put it into fractures...
Yeah, well, you've anticipated my question, which is therapeutic use for this.
I am so excited about this. And it could all melt down. That happens. But this is a really... what makes this unique is it causes healthy bone building. So you don't get these compensatory signals that come in and say, let's start causing bone loss.
Yeah.
So you just keep getting this nice bone building, and then the rest of it follows.
And presumably the mechanism that the hormone is exerting at the bone is not sex specific.
It is not, and that is what is beautiful about this, that in our desire to look at female-specific physiology, we've uncovered something that works for you as well.
I'm very pleased. So, I've actually never broken a bone, so...
but you might.
Oh, yes.
You might.
Well, I was going to say, as I'm getting older. Which brings us full circle to sort of where we began this conversation about the importance or the way that or the importance of considering gender when doing things. And I know it's been a controversial issue in terms of epidemiology of doing clinical trials and so on, that for a long time the subjects were, well, in physiology the subjects were young male students.
Oh, yes.
And so I believe you're on the National Academy board about women's health and...
Funding, yes. And I would say that, I've always sort of felt it, that the study of women's health and female-specific physiology and even sex differences has really been underappreciated by the scientific elite and underfunded. And in part, that's because I think the lens of women's health was entirely seen as breast cancer research. And that's borne out by the statistics. So if you look at the amount of active funding for breast cancer right now, it's about $2 billion from the NIH. If you look at funding for chronic diseases that are horrible for young women, like polycystic ovary syndrome and endometriosis, which affects a lot more women than breast cancer, the funding is almost flatline compared to, it's pitiful. And so I'm really hoping that this committee, as well as the White House Initiative on Women's Health, will start turning that around. And where there's money, scientists will follow.
Well, the war on cancer showed that very
That's
clearly.
right. And so, and the reason people got into breast cancer is because there was a lot of pro-activism around that. Remember Schroeder, she was that senator, and she's the one who really pushed to get these studies for breast cancer. in women in these clinical studies done. And so I think that's what it needs. It just needs a little oomph, and then we'll get going.
And the other thing is that chronic diseases, even in males, have not received very much attention. I used to do meetings at BAMBI on chronic fatigue syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Which is another example of a very much neglected area affecting lots of people.
Right. And so I feel that, you just getting yourself into a different space in terms of your research, or just, looking at everything in a new light and saying, this is really important for, our health. We need to understand this at a basic level. I do think there's going to be new biology emerging that not only will it be good for maybe clinical aspects, but also basic biology. We'll learn a lot.
Well, that seems to be a very good moment to stop.
Okay.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank
Holly.
you.